In this module, we will learn how government acts as an agent for economic planning and development. The question that had engulfed the economists during the 1930 to 50 was, if a price system is efficient, what role is there for the government policy? It is important to remember that efficiency is not the only criteria by which an economic system may be judged. Since the 1930s, there has been a profound change in the way government economic activities are perceived. Government participation in economic activities is hardly a matter of disagreement. There had been numerous instances, one being the latest economic crisis of 2008-9, where markets failed and governments across economies had to play a major role in controlling the markets and ensuring economic stability. Unlike the pre-World War I period, government these days are expected to look into economic matters and ensure economic stability apart from performing the political and social activities. In addition, a price system itself requires certain government action. A case can be clearly made for government to redistribute incomes in the interest of equity. For the purpose, the government uses many policy instruments to allocate resources and redistribute income. This chapter highlights the role of government in economic planning and development. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the role and functions of the government in an economy and know how planning process can be effective instrument of economic growth. Let us now look at the role of government. Over the period of time, government's role in an economy has been redefined. There has been the dilution of laissez-faire principle, and governments are called for intervention even in sectors that were exclusively reserved for the private sector. The markets have failed to ensure full employment and economic stability. Governments across the country and around the world play a dominant role despite many countries being market economies, because markets do not allocate all or even nearly all of the output the economy produces. The governments are involved in affecting the way income is produced and allocated. Next, we will discuss changing role of government in economic development and planning. Since the 1930s, there has been a gradual change in the concept of state, and its scope has steadily increased. With the rise in income inequalities and unemployment, there was a gradual change in thinking of the 19th century economists and policy makers. These social economic evils were attributed to private ownership of capital. The Great Depression saw the rise of Keynesian school of thought, which advocated an active role of the government in the economic sphere. It became a driving force in economic decision making in the 20th century. In 1929, unemployment reached a peak of 25%, and it was widely argued that markets had failed and there was increasing pressure for government intervention to curb the economic downfall. Keynes forcefully argued in favor of the economic role of the government in saving the economy through effecting a rise in effective demand. He demonstrated that fiscal activities of the government could raise employment and maintain it at a high level. He introduced the concept of compensatory finance, whereby government expenditure is augmented to compensate for the decline in private expenditure. The Depression brought many other problems in the forefront. The stock markets had crashed, banks failed, poverty and unemployment rose along with deflation. The government took active steps to stabilize the economy and introduced many programs under the New Deal program to alleviate problems of unemployment, social security, insurance, etc., and a host of other social economic problems. Post-World War II period saw high periods of economic growth. However, it was accompanied with high levels of poverty and inequality. This provided an impetus for further government intervention, and more programs were announced targeted to education, health, employment and social security sectors. By the 1950s, governments across countries had assumed a greater role from protecting the country from aggression and war to a wider role of a welfare state with the objective of achieving maximum social welfare. There was a large expansion in the role of the government, and the public spending as a percentage of GDP increased from 12% in 1913 to 45% in 1995. Since then, the government has assumed greater importance in affecting economic activities. They play even more critical role in the development of less developed and developing countries. Both political, ideological factors have contributed to the rise of government activities. So far, the classical economists had focused their attention on the allocative function of the government, but gradually Marxist and socialist thinking took over and government started playing significant distribution functions in market economics. The rise of centrally planned economies of the Soviet Union and Eastern European economies was another move in this direction. Gradually, the pure market economies such as the US moved towards a mixed economy system. Mixed economies involve a larger role of government with income distribution, poverty reduction and equity, and economic stability as the main policy objectives. Countries with larger public sector were seen as less prone to fluctuations in the business cycle. Public spending on education and health, progressive taxation, subsidies, welfare schemes, etc. were the common government programs, and the public enterprises were used for generating productive employment. Keynes in 1963 pointed that, quote unquote, the political problem of mankind is to combine three things: economic efficiency, social justice and individual liberty, unquote. The governments across nations try to achieve the goals of economic efficiency and equity through the appropriate design of public sector programs and financing. Apart from ensuring internal and external security, provision of infrastructure and public utilities are the main functions of the government. In countries such as former Soviet Union, Paternalistic government policies were adopted where resources were under government control. In some countries, the governments also influences resource allocation through a system of incentives and directives. In market-oriented economies such as US, market failure also necessitates government intervention in resource allocation as the achievement of an efficient allocation of resources and market correction requires well-defined property rights, enforcement of contracts, and the establishment of antitrust measures. And still another role can be rationalized because of the existence of public goods and externalities. There is a strong case of government intervention in resource allocation in low-income countries. Very few levels of savings and investment, scarce skilled labor, underdeveloped factor and product markets, and a virtual absence of an entrepreneurial class characterize these countries. Now let us understand the roadblocks in the process of economic development. The discussion highlights the importance of government in the social economic activities. It assumes even more importance in the case of developing and underdeveloped countries facing a resource crunch, high poverty, and unemployment. They face a vicious circle of underdevelopment through the forces of low productive investment, the absence of skilled labor, and high poverty. The market forces in such economies suffer from structural imbalances and economic rigidities and thus fail to achieve a high rate of investment and unemployment. The jinx can only be broken through comprehensive government planning. The underdeveloped and developing economies suffer from lack of basic social and economic overheads such as highways, telecom, health facilities, ports, etc. required for the initiation of the development process, as they result in the significant external economies for the expansion of the private sector. These overheads involve large-scale investment, long gestation period, low and uncertain returns that too spread over a period of time. Moreover, the returns from them in the form of specialized labor, high standards of education and health services etc. that are spread over a long period of time accrue to the whole society rather than to an individual investor. The private investment in such overheads as a result is not forthcoming. Thus, there emerges the need for public investment in social overheads to speed up the pace of economic development. Further, the government can easily raise the resource required for incurring such investments through modes of taxation, public debt, and deficit financing. Another area where underdeveloped countries suffer is lack of resources and adequate skills. The markets, as we know, cannot allocate all resources efficiently all the time. They suffer from both incentive and information constraints. Thus, the government, through planning and scheme of priorities, can lead to efficient allocation of scarce resources and investment in sectors involving large external benefits. Besides, the private sector in these countries lack attention to the long-run problems and objectives of the economy and rather concentrates on the short-term profit objectives and is unprepared and reluctant to invest in social projects. Therefore, projects suffer from uncoordinated activities among various sectors of the economy. Moving on to discuss the role of government in economic development and planning. Given the problem faced by underdeveloped economies, there is an important need for development efforts to push up the pace of economic development. The reluctance and problems with the private sector give rise to the need for a comprehensive set of measures by the government to break the vicious circle of underdevelopment. Let's talk about the principal measures undertaken by the government to push up the speed of economic growth. First is provision of economic and social overheads. As discussed, underdeveloped economies face a lack of private investment in economic and social overheads such as education, health, railways, roads, telephone, power, etc. Such overheads create large external economies for the other industries, improve the efficiency of capital, and thus make possible accelerating pace of economic growth. Given the importance of social and economic infrastructure, it is the responsibility of the government to make such investment. Secondly, in mobilization of economic surpluses. The underdeveloped countries face the gigantic task of mobilizing of savings into productive investment. Three kinds of economic surpluses have been identified for the purpose: existing economic surplus, potential economic surplus, and additional economic surplus. These are the excess of income over consumption that is not invested. When such surpluses are not productively invested, the government must resort to some measures to mobilize them. It can do so through modes of taxation and borrowings. Mobilization of economic surpluses into productive investment will lead to higher employment, output, and income generation. It is also necessary to mobilize surpluses in order to reduce income inequalities through progressive taxation and expenditure policies. Thirdly, provision of financial facilities. The success of an economy is also dependent upon its financial sector. A well-developed and sound financial system ensures the availability of capital and efficient mobilization of savings to meet the growing needs of trade and industry. The government needs to ensure that appropriate financial institutions are available to meet such financial needs. For example, the Indian government rationalized 14 major commercial banks in 1969 in the wake of banking system reforms. Fourthly, we will talk about institutional changes. Outmoded institutions stand in the way of economic development. For example, traditional tenancy laws, landlordism, feudal system, ceilings on land holdings, etc. were a roadblock for the growth of agriculture and industry. Reforms and reorganization in such areas were required to accelerate the pace of economic growth. The Indian government initiated land reforms to protect the interest of small and marginal landowners and tenants. Similar measures were adopted to encourage small-scale industries, to improve labor efficiency, to regulate relations between labor and capital, etc. Such measures go a long way in improving production efficiency and building up of intangible capital. Now we shall discuss about the rationale for public sector in economic development. As we know, government directly participates in the economic activities through the public sector enterprises. The public sector is composed of enterprises which are owned and controlled by the government. Such entity includes institutions such as hospitals, government-run schools, defense, local and state government management and their departments, etc. They engage in the production, delivery and allocation of goods and services by and for the government or its citizens, whether national, regional or local, with the aim of maximizing social welfare. The public sector has three important roles to play. First one is compensatory or substitutive role. The need for public sector arises when there is a need to compensate for the deficiency of the market system. It can substitute for the private sector and perform corrective, productive and distributive activities and at the same time ensure efficient utilization of scarce resources. The public sector also makes up for the deficiencies of the market system in the achievement of socially desirable objectives such as those concerning health and education. The private provision of such services has been inadequate and inequitably distributed. Second is adjunctive role. The public sector plays an adjunctive role in the provision of public and merit goods. The market fails in the assessment of true preferences of the individuals for goods satisfying social wants and thus does not provide such goods. Third is competitive role. The public sector plays a competitive role in the provision of merit goods in order to keep the private sector's monopolistic tendencies in check. The government either directly provides these goods or subsidizes the private sector provision of these goods. Overall, the public sector, especially in an underdeveloped and developing economy, can help in realizing goals of economic development through generating more employment, more foreign exchange earnings, diversified economic structure, supporting private sector, building industrial base and capital formation. Other functions are optimum allocation of resources, balanced regional development and achieving social objectives. Economic planning is very much required for development. Now let us discuss how. The process of economic development requires planning, especially in developing and underdeveloped economies. It is the process by which key economic decisions are undertaken by the government to achieve targets of economic development within a specified period of time. The idea of planning gained momentum after the World War II when advanced countries suffered serious disruptions and required rehabilitation. On the other hand, the underdeveloped countries were embarking on the growth process. The socialist economies of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries also popularized the concept of planning. By the late 1960s, with the gradual extension of government economic activities, planning gained considerable importance across countries. Even in capitalist economies, planning is an essential element to take care of defects associated with the market system and to ensure economic stability. In the case of developing economies, planning takes the form of development planning to secure a rapid role of growth and to take care of economic rigidities and structural bottlenecks. As described, quote, the change in ideology of people, their growing social and economic evils of maldistribution of income and wealth have drawn attention to the need of directing economic growth in a manner that but would bring about not only increased production but would ensure more equitable distribution of the larger output. Egalitarian measures have therefore been called for, and regulation of economic mechanism has become necessary to ensure social justice and equality. Unquote. There are two main constituents of economic planning. Firstly, a system of ends to be pursued, and secondly, knowledge as to available resources and their optimum allocation. Thus, economic planning involves organization and utilization of resources to maximum advantage in terms of defined social ends. Planning involves formulation of goals, fixing targets to be achieved and priorities for each sector, mobilization of financial and other resources required for execution of the plan, creation of organization for execution of plan, assessment or evaluation of progress of plan. The government is vested with the responsibility of successful implementation of plan through regulations and control measures. It is entrusted with the tasks such as what to produce, for whom to produce, and how to produce. The objectives of planning are: the planning process is adopted to achieve various objectives varying from the removal of poverty, raising living standards for achieving rapid industrial growth, and correct the macroeconomic imbalances. It is regarded as a panacea of all economic ills. The objectives vary from country to country depending upon the social, political, and economic structure of an economy, stages of development, and so on. Following are the key objectives of the planning process. Firstly, to achieve full employment. The primary concern of an economy is to ensure maximum employment. The market forces fail to ensure optimum allocation of resources. The planning process is directed to those areas where employment is low, and steps are taken to improve skills and for the creation of employment opportunities. Secondly, to improve living standards. The planning process aims to increase national income and to achieve higher living standards through rapid growth in primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. Thirdly, rapid industrialization. Industrialization is regarded as key to economic growth and solution to the problems of unemployment. The governments across countries try to achieve industrial progress through the planning process by specifying planned targets to the industrial sectors. Next is reduction in inequalities. The markets are criticized for raising income inequalities. Therefore, the governments are entrusted with the task of ensuring a just distribution of income and equal opportunities for all. At the same time, steps are taken for development of backward and underdeveloped regions of the country. Next is economic growth. Another main objective of planning in underdeveloped and developing countries is to remove obstacles to economic growth. Steps are targeted to achieve balanced regional growth and break the vicious circle of underdevelopment. It also ensures that economy is less prone to fluctuations so as to achieve economic stability. Next is the objective of self-sufficiency. Every economy aims to achieve self-sufficiency in the food and raw materials in order to reduce dependence on imports and meet the needs of all allied sectors. Self-sufficiency is essential for ensuring a stable food supply and prices, and in turn for national security. Thus, the national plans give considerable importance to the objective of promoting farm output and stable food supply. Next objective of planning is price stability. Another objective arising from ensuring self-sufficiency is keeping inflationary and deflationary tendencies in check. Unstable prices are detrimental to the achievement of growth objectives. Thus, through planning, governments across countries attempt to achieve socio-economic goals. It enables optimum utilization of scarce resources as a clear distribution can be made between essential and non-essential uses and directing them towards the production of goods for mass consumption and reduce wastage of resources. Governments through its various tools and rights can operationalize these plans. The success of planning thus depends on how effectively governments can implement these plans and reach the planned targets. As discussed, successful planning can go a long way in promoting economic growth in underdeveloped and developing economies. Let us now summarize what we have discussed in this module. The government is an organization that uses coercive force to coordinate people's activities according to set rules and regulations. It takes responsibility for provision of goods and services that cannot be produced by the market, such as public goods and social security, etc. Government intervention in markets is required to improve macroeconomic efficiency by correcting a market failure. The government or the public sector plays a vital role in the process of economic development through its various initiatives such as the provision of social and economic overheads, development of financial facilities, bringing institutional changes, and through mobilizing economic surpluses. It complements the private sector and at the same time plays a compensatory and substitutive role in sectors where there is lack of private investment. Planning is a process by which key economic decisions are undertaken by the government to achieve targets of economic development within a specified period of time. Thank you.